Well, thanks for the introduction and then the introduction. I have to say that God is faithful. And I'm blessed to have been raised by godly parents and gotten to see amazing things. And when I was a younger man, I'm actually putting a clock up here so that I don't just drone on and kill y'all tonight. But I'll keep talking as long as y'all want me to. So we'll go with that. But I struggled with my faith as a young man, even after seeing a lot of amazing things. I can say that God, I believe, gives us signposts, things in our lives that when you're going through dark times or tough times, which you will, everybody will go through tough times. I do believe that He puts things along the path that you look back at that and you can't figure it out apart from God. You just that's one of those things. And Woodlawn was one of those things for me. My mom being ill with cancer. I lost my father to cancer. So kind of like in the story with Woodlawn, you don't win every football game, and most of the time when people are diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, most of the time they actually do pass on. But God does do certain things sometime that you can't explain any other way. And I would say that Woodlawn is one of those things. And I'll tell you how I figure what I'll do is I'll kind of tell you how it all came together, give you a little bit of my background, and then I'll share with you some principles, some things that God kind of taught me even through the process of writing, but things that He's also just taught me in my life. And usually I walk around a lot, but I think I'd be y'all have to be doing that. What do they call it when they toss you over their heads? And you're not going to have to do that for me to walk around a whole lot, but that's okay. So I'll tell you, when I was a little boy, I had a different upbringing than most kids, and y'all probably are all shocked when you see that this was based in 1973. Y'all look up here and you think, man, that guy looks really young. That's what y'all are thinking. But anyway, thank you. I had a different upbringing. First of all, when any of us grow up, we're seeing everything that we see for the first time. And so our perspective is very limited. And so those of you who are in college, your perspective today is much broader and deeper than it was just 5 years ago when you were still maybe living under the roof of your parents or had not ventured out some. So you get out and you get a little bit more perspective. And probably for a lot of you, you realized your parents weren't as dumb as you thought they were. I mean, you oh my gosh, they were right about a lot of these things. But then you get a little older and maybe you have your own kids or you start working and your perspective gets a little broader and you begin to realize the profundity of things that occurred earlier in your life. And for me, that's kind of how Woodlawn was. I was a kid. Those of you who saw the movie, I was adorable in the movie, pulled around on the little tire and all that. I thought I was quite cute. I thought it was good casting. But anyway, tremendous casting. Now, my mom, on the other hand, they had her this willowy 5'8", like Victoria's Secret model or something. My mom, she's like, yeah, that's perfect casting. But anyway, my mom's cute, but she doesn't look like Virginia Williams, the lady playing there. But anyway, so as a kid, I had a different kind of perspective than a lot of folks because I grew up watching my dad go off to school, and to me, coaches just carried guns. That was what the coach did. They went to school and carried their weapons, like a policeman. I mean, it was different, and I didn't know anything different. But I also didn't know anything different once Christ moved there and broke down the racial divides and the hate that had been there. That was the only thing I knew too. See, I knew that when God does something amazing, that's just the way it is, and people are people. So for a white kid being around a bunch of black football players and white football players at Woodlawn High School, to me, orange and, that's not orange. That's my dad played at Auburn, if y'all saw the video. But gold and green were what mattered to me. I didn't care about black and white. And really, my only prejudices really as a kid were how good at football you were. I mean, that was a character fault of mine. It was like, you're not that good. I don't want to sit on the bus next to you. But Tony Nathan, hey, I'll sit by you. You're great. You're this. You're wonderful. But so my upbringing was very different, and I was blessed in that. But I didn't really realize how profound what God did, how profound it was, because you're seeing everything for the first time. Like if we have any people working toward a medical degree or anything like that, or research papers and research studies, you'll say, it's an N of 500, and then we're looking at these p-values or whatever else. Well, I had an N of 1, and so my only perspective was what I saw. And so I didn't really realize, not everybody sees all 44 players on a football team come to Christ. That's unusual. One of the differences in the movie and the reality is the movie took a few liberties to create some characters and to do some things to illustrate things that happen in a way that would make for better continuity and a better storyline. So if y'all know any of the things in the movie that didn't happen, we can talk afterwards, or I'll take some questions afterwards. But there were a number of things in the movie that didn't happen. One thing was I'll just tell you how it happened. Wells Goebel was like the Billy Graham of high schools. He was going around to high schools all over Birmingham and would ask coaches, can I come talk to your football team? In the movie, Wells Goebel actually becomes a one character named Hank Irwin, who was also the chaplain for my dad's football team, but in reality it was two people who did a lot of this stuff. And Wells Goebel was the guy who came by and said, Coach, I'd like to talk to your football team. Well, let me backpedal just a little bit. My brain's a little bit scrambled because of the caffeine in my Mountain Dew, I think. But Dad was not a Christian. Okay, he was not a believer, but he wasn't a racist either. He just wanted to win football games. And his biggest fault was that he was one of those people who might just plow through you to get what he wanted. He wanted to win football games. He wanted to be a great football coach. His first 2 years at Woodlawn, they had moderate success, but that third year, he decided he wanted to be even more successful. Now, he became the head coach at 29 years old, the year that the federal government mandated busing. So he's 29 years old, so not much older than a lot of you who are in school. First year head coach, largest school in Alabama just about. And, oh, by the way, we're going to take 500 white kids out of your school and bus 500 black kids in from Hayes High School. Have a good, career. That was kind of where Dad was. So the first 2 years were pretty rocky, to say the least. And it wasn't like all the white people hated all the black people, or all the black people hated all the white people. If you have just a fringe on both sides who don't like each other, it can make for a pretty bad situation. You don't have to have everybody hating each other for it to be a really bad situation. Oftentimes it's the opposite. Oftentimes, we get a bad reputation at times around here when it's like, you may say, well, we all get along pretty good. No, but everybody doesn't. There are people who still hate black people, and there are black people who still hate white people. At Woodlawn, there was a fringe here and a fringe here, and it meant chaos at that school. I mean, it was absolute chaos, particularly in 1971, Dad's first year. People being stabbed, people being shot, people being, a lot of the white kids would wear motorcycle chains or bicycle chains as their belts to use as weapons when they fought. People would have brass knuckles, knives, guns, etc. And so a lot of bad was going on. On the football team, it wasn't like that, but there was no unity. And so my dad saw, for us to win at all, these guys are going to have to come together somehow. So he said, we're going to have football camp, which was a glorified word for y'all are all going to sleep in the gym. Not really, in essence, is what it was. He said, you're going to practice football, you're going to eat, you're going to practice football, you're going to eat, and then you're going to sleep in the gym on cots, and you're all going to be together. And he wasn't doing this for any super spiritual reason. He just knew that, if y'all all work together and everything and you're around each other, you probably realize you're not that much different. Let's do this. Well, Wells Goebel came in the middle of that, knocked on my dad's door and said, "Hey, Coach, I'd like to talk to your football team." And Dad's like, "What do you want to talk to my football team about?" He said, "I want to talk to them about Jesus." And Dad was just like, "Nah." And I can tell you, he thought that would make him soft. He thought, football players need to be tough. You're going to make them soft. I don't really want that. And Wells Goebel said, "Well, Coach, if you were to die today, you know where you would spend eternity," which is actually classic Wells Goebel for anybody who ever knew the guy. He would still do that today. Yeah, if he meets you, just by the way, "Hey, I'm Wells Goebel. What's your name? Where are you going to spend eternity?" You'd be like, "Oh." Even you know Jesus or whatever, you're still like, "Oh." But anyway, so Dad's like, "I don't know." Really gave the typical evangelism explosion kind of answer. Dad's like, "I don't know. I'm a pretty good guy. I haven't hurt anybody. I try to live a good life." And Dad said, "I don't think anybody can know that." And Wells Goebel said, I know what I do." And my dad's like, "All right, you can have 15 minutes. So what Dad didn't know is he had 4 Christians on his football team already. And Wells came and spoke and asked for folks to come stand with him. And the entire team came forward, except for those 4 who already, they were Christians already. So they came, but the entire team came to Christ. But my dad didn't. And Chris has heard this a million times, but some of you may have been like this. You may be like this now, or you may know people like this. A lot of people will hold the gospel and the truth out here. Right? Just, that's good for you. And it may be that their ears are kind of clogged, where they're not really hearing the gospel. Or I described it a couple of nights ago, when Peter, in his zeal for Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, cuts the guy's ear off. Now, how easy do you think it would be for that guy to hear from Jesus if he doesn't have an ear? But how many times have we, in our zeal, maybe cut somebody's ears off? Or maybe someone has seen somebody talk the talk, but they never walk the walk. And they just like, "You know what, I'm just not hearing what you're saying anymore." Or maybe they've been hurt by someone who called themselves a Christian. So it's become very hard for them to hear it. And for those people, they need to see the gospel before they're ever going to move. Now the gospel, Romans 1:16, there's a free book in it for somebody who can tell me, what does Romans 1:16 say?
Not ashamed of the gospel.
Okay, wait, hands up. The guy who had it. Okay, you got it over there. Sorry, you had it over here, but your hands.
I'm not ashamed of the gospel. For it's the power of God. That's it.
Yeah, there you go. It's a free book in it. Right there. We'll give another one. So, it's not that good a book, so so the gospel is the power of God for salvation. So hearing the gospel is essential. But as believers, oftentimes we've gotten in the way of people hearing the gospel because we've got too much junk that's yelling at them and they don't hear. And so my dad was one of those people. And I think as a coach, he's thinking, this is an emotional experience. These guys are going to probably come down off cloud 9. We're about to work them really hard for the next 3 weeks before they go off. When we start school and the season starts, they'll probably start pointing fingers at each other and this is going to fall apart. But just the opposite happened. He started seeing walls come down and guys love each other, really love each other. And, Jesus said, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. And by this, the world will know that you are my disciples, by the love you have one for another." Notice that Jesus didn't say, "A new commandment I give you, that you like one another. And by this, the world will know that you're my disciples because of the like you have one for another." Because liking people requires nothing of you. You can be a really agreeable person. Oftentimes, some of us are just born with a really nice disposition where we just like folks. It's easy for me to hang out with just about anybody. My dad used to joke about it. He'd tell me, "Son, I wish I was more like you with people, but I just don't like people that much." And I laughed at that. But the reality is my dad did love deeply. See, liking someone, you can like the same video games or the same football team or the same music or like to hang out at the same place, like the same comedians. It doesn't require anything of you. You just like being around people because it's easy. But love, Jesus said, love as I have loved you. How did Jesus love? He gave himself up for us, for those he loved. He said, you are more important than me. And for you all, the commandment I give is that you love like I love. And like I love. Give yourself up for people. And so when you see that, when Jesus says, and by this the world will know that you are my disciples, think about that. That's unnatural. It's not that unnatural for you to like people. I mean, again, that doesn't require any work. Love can be really, really difficult. And even one of the things that a criticism I've heard of the movie is, yeah, once again, it's the story that once you give yourself to God, all your troubles are gone, and the team started winning and everything else. Well, they didn't watch the movie that much because we lost the Banks both years. And there was some tough stuff that happened. We also lost to Inslee the first year, but not that I'm remembering football games or anything, but I can't help it. It's just Coach's son. But the reality is, that's not true. But I will tell you this, that if you have a group of people who have decided that I'm always going to put this guy and this guy ahead of me, across the board, the entire team has decided that everybody else on that team is more important than them, versus a team full of people who have a bunch of individuals, don't you think that the one team might perform a little bit better? I mean, even if they're not as good athletes, even if they're not as talented, you're going to see that's amazing. I would say the same thing's true of businesses, or cheerleading squads, or a church staff. When you put others first, and that catches the attention of the world. Because that's not natural. It's supernatural. And that's what happened with my dad. He saw these guys, and if you saw the movie, Coach Stearns says, when my dad says, I just believe in what I can see, here now, and he says, well, excuse me, or I beg your pardon, not I beg your pardon, what do you say? Yeah, with all due respect. It's not a term I use, but with all due respect, I guess I just don't respect people. But no, he says, with all due respect, Coach, take a look around. Because it was happening. It was all around. I mean, you could see it. It was an amazing thing. And so, Dad still struggling with this. And as opposed to the movie, it was actually the Friday before school started. So 3 weeks into this, they decided to have an FCA meeting at a house up in Crestwood, which at that time was all white. And it was actually kind of ritzy. So Dad wondered, will there be any black kids there? Will they feel like they don't belong and they're not going to show up? Or even, what if, even worse, what if they show up and the family doesn't want them to come in? And so Dad was concerned, but he showed up. And he got there, and the family, I got to talk with the lady who opened her home up Sunday night. Long story, and I won't get into it, but through a message board on television, online, I found this lady who had opened her house up, and basically just simple obedience. This lady just said, you know what? I'm a believer. We're called to be hospitable. I'll open my house up. My dad went. He saw the guys all getting along, praying together, hugging each other. It was real. It was something that he couldn't explain, and that he didn't have, and he knew it. And so he slipped out the back, he got in his car, started driving home, and he's talking through the windshield to a God that he's not sure exists or not. Talks all the way home, gets to our house, actually a house probably smaller than this, and gets on his knees beside his bed, and he met Jesus. He gave his life to Christ, and that was, he immediately began loving people and recognized, I never had this love. His words, they repeated them exactly in the movie, was, I want what those guys have. I don't know how to love, and I want love. I want to love like they do. And his life was characterized by that going forward. So, one of the things that I learned through that process, and I kind of alluded to it at the beginning, if you watch the movie or you read the book and you see this story, what's undeniable, first of all, is that the star of the story is not Tony Nathan. It's not Tandy Gerelds. It's God. It's Jesus. He's the star of this story. because he's the only one who could cause people to love like this. And our world, our nation is crying out for this right now. Two things that our world is desperate for. And it's in the preface of the book. It's just, I think as I wrote the book, this is what I would like to see happen with Woodlawn. They want something, and we want something real. I mean, look at reality television. And first of all, it's the most non-reality that there probably is out there. But the fact is, there's an addiction with it because people are like, I want something real. I want something real. Well, God is real. He is real, and He is here. He is present. But the other thing is that we want love and connection. You know, we look at everybody, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all this stuff where we're trying to be connected. And it betrays that heart that is dying to connect with someone. But the reality is, as Pascal described us, we have a heart-shaped vacuum in our soul. Excuse me, a God-shaped vacuum. If we have a heart-shaped vacuum, we just need to stick a heart in there. But we have a God-shaped vacuum in our soul that only God can fill. And yet we desperately are running after things. Sometimes, you know, we run after sex, or we run after drink, or we run after something to make us laugh, or something to make us feel good, or something else, and God is saying, I'm here. And our country is dying for that. We're all dying for that. Except by God's grace, we have Jesus in our hearts. And so, to know that as a little boy, I saw all this, and I thought nothing of it. And I mentioned before that the star of this story is Jesus Christ. A lot of people would make it Tony Nathan, which he's a good star for the movie. I mean, Caleb's a cute guy and stuff. He's talented. I mean, I hear he's cute. That's what girls say. You know. But the reality in this whole story is that there was a superstar, Tony Nathan, but then you had a bunch of role players. You had a bunch of guys on that team who were just, quote, ordinary. They were regular guys. My dad, just a regular old coach. Now, later in life, he won a lot of football games, and he, you know, you could say he was semi-famous and stuff before he passed away. But really, normal guy. Wells Gold, normal guy. Hank Irwin was just like, yippee, let's go there. I mean, he was really just this straight out of college, just bubbly, excited all the time. I really think he kind of irritated my dad a little bit, you know, because my dad was stoic, and Hank was just all like, let's do it, Coach, we can do this, you know. But you have these normal, ordinary people. Except, God doesn't look at any of us as ordinary. He says that you're fearfully and wonderfully made. And through this story, what I recognize is that God does the extraordinary through the ordinary. And I think particularly in a college atmosphere, that it's really easy to compare yourselves to one another. I mean, I think it's really easy to do that. I mean, heck, your grades, everybody, you know, I gotta have this is my GPA, we're all competing for jobs when we get out there, and this guy's got a really pretty girlfriend, and this girl's got a nice looking boyfriend, and he's got a better car than my boyfriend does. I mean, there's just so much stuff, you know, that it's easy to kind of compare. Man, so-and-so got a job straight out of college, man, it's a great job. Why don't I have a job? God, forget all that. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. And God has you in circumstances to use you and to work in you for His glory. And He is doing the extraordinary through each of you. There's no other you in the world. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to be like anyone else. Because God sees all of us as His children, and He's loved by you in a way that only you can love Him. You see the world as only you can see it, and He loves that. And He loves you. Woodlawn is a story of love. That's what it is. It's not a football story. It's got some really cool football in it. But it's not a football story. It's a story about a Father in heaven who loves us desperately. And I don't always share this, but recently feel like it's something to throw out there to you all. I dealt with depression in my life. particularly as a younger man. And I always wanted to feel loved by God. Who in the room has ever just thought, I just wish I could be hugged by Him or feel? Anybody feel like that? Okay. Well, see, I think that that's perfectly normal. How many of you have ever been around somebody in church or in a worship outing or something like that where you're like, you noticed how much they were into the worship and you're kind of like, wish I felt like that. Anybody ever been like that? Okay, all right, so good. We're all being honest here. Who's ever gotten naked? No, I'm just kidding. Sorry about that. Wrong crowd. My mistake. So, no. Continuing on. Sorry. Couldn't help it. It was just I had y'all there. Totally lost you now. Especially when I'm the one standing up here talking about being naked. Now it's really gotten bad. That pizza's going to be coming up for something. Anyway. No, so we desire deeply. God has made us as spiritual beings, emotional beings. And He knows that we need that touch. The world needs that. And earlier I was talking about how the world's had their ears cut off sometimes by Christians or by people claiming to be Christians. And yet they need to be loved. And love is the thing that will overcome that. And as feeling people sensual, not in the bad term, but sensual eyes, ears, touch, sensual people, we want that touch from God. And I really am convinced that we are in a place today in our country where God is ready to use us to revive the country. And it's going to require something that will resonate with people who want to feel. And the way that He's going to do this is that, y'all know what we call the church, what it's called? There's a bunch of names for the church, but there's the bride of Christ or the blank of Christ. Body of Christ. Now, if you were ever to get a hug from somebody, what is used to hug someone? Body. Your body. Arms, hands, a body. If you're ever going to serve somebody, you use your body. When I dealt with depression, I would cry out for God to make me feel loved. I wanted to feel loved. And I was like, where are you? And over time, the church body, the body of Christ, began to come around and love me. And that I would be like, man, that was really, really nice. And then I'd still be like, God, I really want you to. And the body of Christ would be coming and loving me. And one day it was just kind of like, I was like, that's me. I'm loving you. That the body of Christ. Now, don't get me wrong. There are spiritual moments where you get those little chills or little things happen where you just feel like, man, that was God. But God intends to love the world through the body. We serve those around us. We serve this community. Y'all opened this house up. It's a physical place where bodies can be loved because we want to be loved. And that's what the world is going to be overwhelmed by. The love of Christ. And it's done. Y'all are talking about serving, feeding the poor and doing these things. That is the body loving this world. It's the body of Christ. And it's undeniable. When the God of the universe is desperately loving us through, each other, then we can go and desperately love those around. And that overwhelms people. My dad had no choice but to believe. He had a choice. But he was drawn to this peculiar love that he couldn't explain. My next door neighbors at my house are Muslim. And I gave them the book and we talked about the film. And I said, you're going to be going at this from a different worldview than I am. But you have to watch it and then figure out who did that. If nothing else, it's a head scratcher for you because something remarkable happened. And it didn't just stop at Woodlawn. It really did spread. It was amazing what God did. And all it took was the body being willing to be used. And walls come down and God is glorified. And so that's really, I want to leave you all with, and then I'll open it up for questions. And I do have books. If you get a book, I'll get another free book to someone. It's my favorite verse. Particularly as it relates to this, is what I quoted earlier, that a new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you, and by this the world will know that you're my disciples, by the love you have one for another. Everybody but Chris is eligible, so hand if anybody knows the reference for that verse. If you don't, then you just lose. You may want to again. Yeah, okay, I tell you what, if you get it, you just have to decide who in the room is going to get the...
John 13:35.
34 and 35, but that's enough. That's good. Hey. So that's really what I want to challenge you all with. Not that you need challenging, but just as a body member, I feel like this is what God is calling me to tonight. That love is the difference maker. That love is that undeniable thing. I mean, when somebody says that love is what makes the world go around, we're talking about God's love. We're not talking about just that girl, she's so cute. No. That's easy. That can be life. That can be hormones. That can be any number of things. Love is that secret thing that says they are more important than me. I'll lay my life down for them. I'll give up myself for them. That's the difference maker. And God intends to work that through the body into this world. And you guys have an amazing opportunity here on campus and in this city. And at this time, this is, I think, an amazing time where our country is primed for God to do something really, really big. So with that, I'll tell y'all thank you and then open it up for questions. 31 minutes. Is that good? I didn't know. I didn't want to. Now let me tell y'all some childhood stories. No, I'm kidding. Now, really, questions can be, did X, Y, Z really happen? Because, that seems pretty far-fetched. Yes?
I may have missed it in the movie, but who is that character in the movie that nobody liked? He's like a...
Shorty?
No.
Oh, Shorty, by the way, that was a caricature of Shorty because he was not that bad a guy, just so anybody knows. He's actually a really good guy, and they just really needed a villain. So, yeah, that was he was a made-up character. He's supposed to be a superintendent, and so y'all want to know just the things that didn't happen, like so y'all just know and everything. Sunday night, there was like one lady who was almost weeping because she was like, that was such a sweet moment with you and your dad, and you did this. And I was like, it didn't happen.
Did your dad really start selling insurance?
Yes, my dad did sell insurance, and it was right across the street from the school. He did that actually for 7 years, and then he got back into coaching. It was not as a result of a phone call from the tunnel from Tony, however. But that made for good cinema. So, yes.
How were you approached to write the book, and how were you approached to
Okay. Yeah. As I was describing earlier, as I got older, I started realizing more and more that this was a story that should be told. But I really didn't know how to proceed. Funny thing is, my wife has written about 20 books. She's written a number of. Her name is Danielle Steele, but but she has written a lot of books. She writes a lot of devotional products and stuff. But still, this story was so personal, and I really didn't know how do you even start to write a story like this. My dad was diagnosed with cancer, and we knew that unless God intervened, he was going to die. And so I started interviewing him before he died, just talking to him. And the thing about it, though, is if you think about the story, I was a little boy. I was, for those who saw the movie, like I said, amazingly cute child. But anyway, I remembered everything very well because it wasn't like I saw it and then was removed from that and wasn't around it the rest of my life. It was almost like the Gospels and oral traditions. You know, it's not like the disciples. They wrote the Gospels, really most critics would say, within 25 to 35 years of the events happening themselves. Well, we're right at 30 years from when those events took place, actually right at 40. And I was always around them. So it's like oral traditions. You know, Dad would talk about it all the time. And so when he started dying, I was like, I've got to preserve this, and we've got to tell this story at some point. Well, about 8 years ago, the Irwin brothers called me and said, we had this idea about Woodlawn. And now Hank Irwin in the movie, the chaplain, is their dad. So they had heard it their whole life too. But Hank is given to hyperbole and stuff, so they wanted to get the true story. No, I'm kidding. But they did want it to be. They wanted to be more authoritative than, hey, our dad just told us this bedtime story. So they called me, and we talked, and nothing happened. And then about 4 years ago, they called me and said, we want to revisit this Woodlawn thing. We want to do it. And so they asked me to come over to their studios, and they interviewed me for about 2 hours on film, telling the story. And at the end of the interview, they slid a contract across the table and said, that's the book rights to our movie. We are going to do this movie, and it's going to be based on your book. And I said, well, that's great, except there's no book. You know, and they were like, so get to writing. And so I called Tony Nathan and introduced the Irwin brothers to him, and then called his parents and got my mom. And we just started interviewing everybody. And I started working on the book. They were working on the screenplay, and I probably did a whole lot more writing on the book than they did initially on the screenplay. They were just getting backstory and background, and had it on film, where I was, writing. And but they would pass the script along to me as they went along, and are you good with this? And I really only asked them to make 2 changes. There were just things that were out of character for my dad. Funny thing, one of them had to do, no offense to the Alabama fan here, but one of them was that when Tony, and right back there, I see you, buddy. When Tony called my dad from the tunnel, they had my dad saying, "Roll Tide" to Tony. I was like, well, I think Dad would probably, like in heaven, be saying, "Hey, Jesus, strike every theater where that happens." Because my dad, played ball at Auburn, and really it was just, I thought it was just kind of cheesy, but didn't really relate to the story. I told him, I said, really, to understand kind of how that all went, my dad, played at Auburn, then was a coach. Tony broke our hearts and went to Alabama, but we loved Tony so much that it was almost like we had these, it was like emotional contortions every Saturday. We'd be watching Alabama and pulling for Tony, but not necessarily for Alabama. And I told them, I said, well, you ought to put us in Auburn clothes, sitting there cheering for Alabama, at the end of this thing, because that was reality. They did do that. And they had my dad using some terms and things that would have made, I think Dad would have been like, Jesus, make them stop, in heaven now. So, but other than that, they did make a lot of changes. They did do a lot of things for dramatic effect to keep continuity. You have to understand that really a lot of the racial things and a lot of the conflict and all was happening a little bit earlier. And there's like a whole chapter on that in the book. But they wanted to place the story in 73, 74. So they kind of compressed a lot of stuff over several years into those 2 seasons. Doesn't make the story any less true in terms of what they're trying to communicate. It just makes the particulars off. Yes, sir?
In the movie, during the football game, at the beginning of the game, when the match was unplugged, did that actually happen?
That did not happen. See, this is what happens right here. This is what happens when God shows up. This is what happens when Todd shows up. That's why I'm telling you all the stories. No, that didn't happen. I will say that if you read the book, We got a fire.
The cops will be in
If anything was really, really significant like that, then I put it in the book. And so if you read through the book, you'll be like, well, golly, that must not happen. The things that they were illustrating some things. First of all, let me tell you this: the Gerelds family and the Nathan family, we love the movie. We love, and you just kind of have to look at what the purpose for each was. I wrote a book that was straightforward historical account of what occurred, and then they were writing a message movie to get the gospel out there, and I applaud them. They actually had tremendous opportunity to probably make a lot more money on the movie. Sony Pictures wanted to buy it. Some other big production houses wanted to buy it. They would have had a big advertising budget, and they wanted to maintain control, creative control, and so they basically had forfeited the budget, which today, really I would encourage you all, if you have contacts across the country, really encourage people to get out, because in the Southeast, knowledge of this movie is pretty great. But without any advertising budget, to keep it in theaters and get this message out to people, they just got to know about it. And so if it's through social media or phone calls to friends across the country, by all means. So what I don't want to do, if I were to reveal all the things that weren't true, I don't want you to think it's that we think there's anything bad about the movie. It just was, it has a different purpose as far as what they were doing. It's a good question. Yes?
I took my 11-year-old son last night to watch the movie. He loved the football. But some of the most powerful parts as a father were just a lot of the fathering moments in the movie. I would love for you to share, if you feel comfortable, just the blessing or the legacy that you feel your father left for you, and then also just as much as you can, how as an adult you maybe saw brokenness in your dad, but God fathered you through that as well.
No, that's a great question. You may have an Oprah moment here. So, no, a lot of the conversations that they had me having with my dad actually occurred later in life, where, and I've kind of made this a point at a few talks recently, and I pray for God to lead me whenever I talk, so I'm guessing that maybe it's spirit led. But I think that men in our country particularly, we have an identity crisis. And I'll say this, for you guys who are coming out of school and everything else, to avoid this identity issue that so many men have, and it's that they start becoming what they do for a living. Their identity is so tied up in their jobs and career, and it can be, can start from just a motivation of I want to provide for my family, I want to do this, but you become coach, or you become doctor, or you become whatever these things are, and we lose ourselves in that. And so balance becomes very, very difficult. And my dad struggled with that throughout his life, and that is why he quit coaching. When he did, he knew he was out of balance, and he quit coaching and got some balance, and he got back into coaching, and still, have to wrestle with that. But Dad's legacy for me and my sisters, which, by the way, another falsehood of the movie, I was not an only child. That one was really tough to do, get my sisters to understand. I just told them, well, Mom and Dad love me the most, and that's why they put me in that's the biggest legacy my dad left us, was to be deep lovers of people, to really love people. And my sisters love very, very deeply. Neither one of them are as outgoing as I am, but there's no question, that people know that man, they really love people. That's the biggest legacy. I really think that when I dealt with depression as a young man, that will kind of speak to some of Dad's fallenness and the way God healed there. I think that kids will oftentimes put their folks on a pedestal, and and sometimes it manifests itself. It's not even that they put them on a pedestal. They think that they're so detached from reality that that they stick them out here. And for me, I kind of worshipped my dad. It was like Dad, Tony, Nathan, any other great football player or something. I'd stick them there. And for me, I had this identity crisis as a 23-year-old. That was when I was really dealing with a lot of deep issues, and I really realized I had put my dad in a spot that he never was supposed to be in. And once I was able, and it sounds funny to say this, once I forgave him for being a human being, then our relationship actually deepened a lot. We had what might end up being another book. We had these poolside talks when he was dying. That there was so much healing, but we had really, to his credit, he was such a loving person, not sweet, saccharine, sweet, like that, but very loving. I mean, I will say he kissed me on my forehead and told me he loved me every day of my life that I was in the house once he came to Christ. But he also whooped the heck out of me a lot. And I didn't deserve it. I was a perfect kid too. But I think that him being man enough instead of being defensive. I think oftentimes as a father, as a man, if you're ever called out on something, it's so easy to be mad. And guys, I'll tell you guys this, and see, I think what I find with a lot of guys, and Chris and I, all we do is analyze relationships and try to be good husbands and fail daily, with that and everything else. But hurt is a vulnerable place to be. And human beings are made up with this fight or flight instinct. And so when a lot of guys are hurt, they feel like they're in a position of strength to get mad. This is actually this crazy this epidemic of killing that we have on the streets is kids who are rejected and hurt, rather than wrestling with the hurt and rejection, they shoot somebody. And as men, oftentimes, we do the same thing in our homes. Somebody says something, and we take that as, you think I'm not a good husband, or you think I'm not a good dad, and now I'm mad, I'm going to shut down. My dad didn't do that. My dad took it like a man and asked for forgiveness. And man, that is a tough thing for a man to do. But I'll tell you what, real men do that. And we have a dearth of that in this country. We got a lot of people who have mistaken ideas about what it is to be a man. My dad was a real man. That's his legacy, and he loved deeply.
I'm pretty curious to know, looking from your personal lens, today in 2015, I would imagine, the 70s in Birmingham to be a pretty racially tense, period. And you saw a lot of that, but you also saw a lot of reconciliation as well. What's something specific that you took from that period that you feel like we could implement into modern day tension and bring in healing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think that's one that as the body of Christ we need to wrestle with vigorously. Some of it is, and this wouldn't be popular in certain circles, but some of it is that it'll be overly popular in some circles and not popular in others, but some of it is that we need to dialogue. We actually need to engage, and over the mountain people need to come into Woodlawn and Fairfield, and the body of Christ needs to desegregate. We need to integrate and do more things together. We also, though, I think we have to have honest discussion, and this is what would be unpopular in some circles. That does mean that political correctness needs to kind of go up on a shelf a little bit, because to have real conversations, we have to be able to have conversations that are real. And we can't be afraid to be vulnerable and out there. And the body of Christ should be a place where we are safe to do that. And that we're holding each other. And And there's still a lot of ignorance. And I don't mean that in a cruel way. I mean that to true ignorance, when people just have not been together. So every opportunity that we have as the body of Christ to integrate and to partner with folks who don't necessarily look like us, I think that we should take it. I also think that mission trips, even if it's mission trips over the mountain, are things that we need to do. But the biggest thing is for people to be able to talk. And for a white person to hear a black person say, "No, you don't understand, I have been pulled over just because I was black." And for the white person to not get defensive about that. And for the black person to be okay with a white person not knowing what you go through, but to listen. That's the body of Christ. We've got to do that, and it requires a lot of people have to bite their lips sometimes to hear the other person. So that's a great question, though, and I appreciate your heart in asking it. Yeah.
It's not really a question. It's kind of like wanted to share, what I experienced from your movie. I think I first heard about Woodlawn probably February. And I've been waiting the entire time to see it.
Yeah.
And this is the first time I got to see it. And a little bit I saw in the previews. And I'm just gonna lay it out there. What we as a student body have experienced on this campus this year. I have seen it go from what Woodlawn was in the beginning of that movie. And no, I didn't want to see that for a long time. And it's just been amazing to see the transition. And it goes back to people who are prayed up and people who are faithful.
Sure.
And, a year ago, I would have, gladly walked away from this school, from this city, and said, I'll just go somewhere else. I'll do whatever. And there's some people who did that.
A lot of people do that with Woodlawn too.
Yeah, and I just want to say I'm sure glad that I'm stayed because I get to kind of experience a little bit of what the people who remained in Woodlawn and in that movie.
Cool.
Kind of experience. It's been fantastic.
Awesome, man. That's cool. By the way, did you ever decide who you were going to give that other book to? Did you say?
Oh, no, sir.
Because and I'm like, is there some girl in here you're trying to impress? One more question, and then I'll sit around and chat with you guys. So I've got a million books I want to sell y'all. So no, one more question. Come on, one more. Make it a good one. No one. Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask questions. What is John Boyd really like? Is he really like the villain kind of guy?
Funny thing is, and then we're going to leave on a kind of my answer is kind of a dud. I think because I was around sports so much and around semi-famous people and stuff all my life, I was around John Boyd. Like my sisters, we were at an event and he was right in front of me in the catering line. He's like right where she is. And my sisters were going, "Todd, it's John Boyd, it's John Boyd." And I was like, "Yeah, but there's chicken wings right there." And so I didn't even talk to him. I had been around him quite a bit. I talked to Sean, I talked to everybody else in the cast just about it. He's an Academy Award winner. I just didn't care. And so he seemed really, really nice around the set. Very, very agreeable. Really, really nice guy. I hesitate to say this, but I would ask y'all to pray for the cast, because not everybody in the cast is a Christian. And there's some of them that I've got to be pretty close to. So just, I'll say that privately, and then if you want to know who in particular, come over or whatever I said the other by myself about it on videotape. So, all right, thank y'all.
Okay, I'm gonna get Jesse's gonna get us one more song, and before he does that, and then of course Todd will be available, and his books will be available.
Yeah, any college students that
sorry, man, what you did was awesome, answering questions. But any college students, we've got up to 40 books that are prepaid by the generosity of just somebody. So
You get a book. You get a book. You get a
So up to 40. If you want a book, get one. I'm sure Todd will sign it, put his personal email and address and everything in it. Take a picture with you, or y'all can all run out the door, whatever you want to do. But there are at least 40 books. If you're an adult and you have a real job and want to pay for it, he'll take your money too, credit card or cash or check.
Credit card, cash, or check.
All right. Well, let's,
Go the boy on.
if you would bow with me for briefly, and then Jesse will close us out with a song. Father, thank you again for another chance to be together in this wonderful experience. And we're thankful for everybody that's here. Thankful for those who make it possible for us to have this place. And we want to thank you so much for Todd and for his story, for his family story, for his willingness to share it with us and his willingness to share his faith. And we pray that this message will stick with us, that we'll be encouraged, we'll be compelled to love people and to show them your love so that they can get to know you. And thank you for everything that we have. I pray in Jesus' name. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy